Picture this. You wake up before dawn, grab your gear, and instead of heading to the kitchen for a hot cup of coffee, you are handed a small green can, a plastic spoon, and told that whatever is inside that tin is your breakfast, your lunch, and possibly your dinner too. No microwave, no fridge, no running water. Just you, the jungle, and whatever the army packed for you weeks ago. That is exactly what hundreds of thousands of American soldiers faced every single day during the Vietnam War. And let me tell you, what they were eating would make your stomach flip. So buckle up, because we are about to take a deep dive into the most disgusting, bizarre, and honestly kind of fascinating world of combat rations from the Vietnam era. Would you eat something out of a can that has been sitting in 100-degree humidity for weeks? Yeah, I did not think so. Let us start at the very beginning. When American forces ramped up their involvement in Vietnam through the 1960s, the military was relying heavily on what they called the Meal Combat Individual, or MCI rations. Soldiers just called them sea rats. And honestly, that nickname said everything you needed to know. These things were the direct descendants of World War II era rations, which means some of the food concepts floating around in those cans were already ancient by the time a 19-year-old kid from Ohio or Georgia was opening them in the middle of the Mekong Delta. The sea ration system had been around since the 1930s. Let that sink in for a second. You are in a war zone in 1968, and the food philosophy feeding you was basically designed before World War II even started. Does that not send a chill down your spine? Think about what was in your fridge in the 1930s compared to today. Now imagine that being your combat menu. Each sea ration box came with 3 separate meals for the day. The meals were labeled B1, B2, and B3 units. Sounds official, right? Sounds almost fancy. But the reality inside those green cans was something else entirely. Soldiers would rip open their daily box and find things like canned meat that came in varieties with names like ham and eggs chopped, beans and franks, beef with spiced sauce, and the legendary, and I use that word very loosely, ham and lima beans. Now, this last one deserves its own chapter in military history. Ham and lima beans was so universally despised by American soldiers that troops gave it a nickname I cannot say on this channel, but trust me, it was creative and it was colorful. Veterans from Vietnam to this day will tell you that finding that particular can in your ration box was basically the worst thing that could happen to you on a Tuesday morning. But why was it so bad? Well, imagine a paste that looks like someone mixed wet cement with mashed vegetables, packed it into a can, heated it at some point in a factory, then sealed it and forgot about it. The texture was reportedly similar to wet cardboard with occasional mysterious chunks. The smell was something veterans describe as a combination of canned cat food and military despair. And the taste? Well, one soldier once described it as licking the inside of a gym locker after a 3-mile run. Now tell me, does that not make you gag a little? Come on, be honest. Here is the thing though, soldiers were not just eating these things as they came. Necessity is the mother of invention, and when you are hungry enough, you get creative, real creative. Troops developed an entire underground culture around their sea rats, trading cans like baseball cards and developing elaborate rituals for making the stuff somewhat edible. The pound cake and fruit cocktail cans were pure gold. Soldiers would trade 2 or 3 other meal cans just to get their hands on those. It was basically the economy of the jungle. One of the most popular techniques for improving sea rations was heating them with heat tabs, those small chemical tablets that could be used to warm food directly in the can. The problem was that heat tabs gave off a toxic blue flame that produced a kind of smoke so thick and so foul-smelling that some troops preferred eating everything cold rather than deal with it. And eating cold ham and lima beans from a tin in 95% humidity at 4 in the morning says everything about how bad those heat tablets were. But wait, it gets better, or worse, depending on how you look at it. Because on top of the main meal cans, each ration box also included what were called accessory packs. These were little supplemental items that were supposed to make life in the field a little more bearable. Things like instant coffee, cocoa powder, sugar, salt, and the absolute star of the accessory pack lineup, cigarettes. That is right. Uncle Sam was putting cigarettes directly into combat meal packages. 4 cigarettes per ration. Because nothing completes a balanced breakfast like a smoke after your ham paste, right? Now, soldiers who did not smoke, and there were not that many in Vietnam given the stress levels, would use those cigarettes as currency. Cigarettes, candy, and the precious packs of Tabasco sauce became the 3 currencies of the jungle. Tabasco, by the way, was not officially included in sea rations. Soldiers either brought their own personal bottles from home or found ways to get them through care packages. And why Tabasco? Because it was the only thing powerful enough to mask the flavor of whatever you were actually eating. Smart. Desperate, but smart. Speaking of things soldiers did to survive mealtimes, let us talk about the canteen cup stove. This was a little improvised setup where troops would cut open a sea ration can, punch holes in the sides, fill it with dirt soaked in lighter fluid or actual fuel, and use it as a makeshift stove to heat their food. Not exactly a Williams-Sonoma setup, but when you are in the field and the alternative is cold beans, you make it work. The canteen cup itself became a multi-purpose cooking vessel, coffee mug, and occasionally even a soup bowl when troops managed to scavenge local ingredients. And this brings us to one of the more fascinating aspects of the Vietnam food experience: the blending of American combat rations with local Vietnamese ingredients. Soldiers who spent extended time in the country, especially those working with local forces or doing long-range reconnaissance, often supplemented their sea rats with whatever they could find or buy in local villages. Fresh vegetables, rice, fish sauce, local peppers. Some veterans actually described these improvised field meals as the best food they had during their entire deployment, which tells you everything about the quality of the official rations. Does that not give you a whole new perspective on what those guys were going through out there? Now let us zoom out for a second and talk about the physical realities of eating in Vietnam specifically, because the environment itself made an already difficult food situation genuinely nightmarish. The heat and humidity in Vietnam were unlike anything most of these young Americans had ever experienced. Temperatures regularly hitting above 90 degrees Fahrenheit, combined with humidity levels that could make the air feel like a warm, wet towel wrapped around your face. Under these conditions, food does not keep well, at all. The canned rations were technically shelf-stable, but once a can was opened, you had very little time before it started going bad. Soldiers learned quickly that you eat what you open, and you open only what you can eat right then. Leaving half a can of beef stew for later was not really an option when insects, heat, and moisture were working against you at every turn. The insects alone were a constant battle. Ants, flies, and all manner of jungle creatures had zero problem invading your meal the moment you cracked a can open. And then there was the issue of water. You cannot eat most military food without water, and finding clean water in Vietnam was its own survival challenge. Soldiers used iodine tablets to purify water from streams and rivers, and those tablets turned the water a distinctive brownish-purple color and gave it a chemical taste that made mixing powdered coffee or cocoa into it a pretty grim experience. Mixing instant sea ration coffee with iodine-purified water in a dirty canteen cup at first light in the jungle. That was breakfast. Every single morning. But here is something that tends to get overlooked when people talk about Vietnam War food. The psychological weight of eating the same terrible things day after day, week after week, in an environment that is already pushing you to your physical and mental limits. Food is not just fuel, it is comfort, it is routine, it is one of the things that connects you to normal life. When that food is consistently awful, when every meal is a reminder that you are far from home in a hostile place eating brown paste from a tin can, it grinds you down in ways that go beyond just nutrition. Veterans have spoken about how receiving care packages from home with homemade cookies, crackers, peanut butter, real coffee, or just anything that tasted like something a human being would voluntarily eat was almost indescribably meaningful. That package from mom with the oatmeal cookies that had been in the mail for 2 weeks and arrived slightly crushed and a little stale? That was gourmet. That was like a 5-star restaurant experience compared to what the army was handing out. Can you imagine what that must have felt like? Now, toward the later stages of American involvement in Vietnam, the military did make some attempts to update and improve the ration situation. The LRP ration, which stood for Long Range Reconnaissance Patrol, was introduced for special forces and soldiers operating in deep cover situations where they could not carry the weight of full sea ration boxes. These were lightweight freeze-dried meals that required only hot water to prepare, in theory. In practice, soldiers often had no way to heat water safely, which meant they were eating dry, crumbly, reconstituted freeze-dried beef stew straight from the bag, crunching it like some kind of horrible combat granola. The idea was solid. The execution was, well, you can imagine. The LRP rations were actually an early version of what would eventually evolve into the modern MRE system used by military forces today. So in a strange way, every soldier eating a modern meal ready to eat can trace a direct culinary lineage back to those guys crunching dry freeze-dried stew in the jungles of Southeast Asia. Progress is relative, but it is still progress. There is another side to all of this that is worth spending a moment on. The contrast between what officers and enlisted men were eating. Soldiers in base camps and larger installations often had access to mess halls where actual hot food was prepared. Not gourmet, but real cooked food. Hot rice, actual eggs for breakfast, occasionally even fresh meat. For troops in the field, hearing about base camp food was almost like hearing about a mythical place, and the disparity in food quality depending on your assignment was a very real source of tension. You have two soldiers, same country, same war, and one is eating a hot meal on a tray, while the other is scraping beans out of a dented can in a foxhole. Does that seem right to you? And let us not forget that Vietnamese civilians and allied South Vietnamese forces had their own food challenges throughout the conflict. The disruption of agriculture, the damage to rice paddies and supply chains, and the refugee crisis created by the fighting meant that millions of ordinary people were dealing with food insecurity that made even the worst sea ration look luxurious by comparison. Context always matters when we talk about history. What about the long-term physical effects of eating this way? Military nutrition science was still developing during this era, and the sea ration system was not designed with ideal nutrition in mind. It was designed for caloric density and shelf stability. The meals were high in sodium, often lacking in fresh vegetables and fruits, and provided a pretty unbalanced nutritional profile for men who were performing extremely demanding physical activities in extreme heat. Many soldiers lost significant body weight during their tours, not just from physical exertion, but because the food was so unpalatable they simply did not eat enough of it. Some veterans have reported digestive problems that lasted years after their service, which medical researchers have partially attributed to the combination of poor diet, extreme stress, heavy antibiotic use for jungle diseases, and the iodine-treated water that was the only hydration available for extended periods. The body keeps a very detailed record of everything you put into it, and those green cans left quite the ledger entry. By the time the United States was winding down its involvement in Vietnam in the early 1970s, military food scientists were already working on what would eventually replace the sea ration system. The lessons learned from Vietnam and other conflicts made it abundantly clear that troop morale and performance were directly tied to food quality and variety. You cannot fight effectively on ham paste and existential dread. Well, some of those guys somehow did, which is a testament to human resilience more than anything else. The modern MRE, introduced in the 1980s, brought significant improvements in variety, nutrition, and palatability. Today's military rations include meals like Southwest beef and black beans, lemon pepper tuna, cheese tortellini, and even dessert options. They come with flameless ration heaters that use a chemical reaction to produce heat without an open flame. They are still not exactly restaurant quality, but they are light years beyond what a soldier in Vietnam was dealing with. So the next time you open your fridge and complain that there is nothing good to eat, take a second. Think about a 19-year-old kid in the Vietnamese jungle, sitting against a tree in 100-degree heat, opening a can of ham and lima beans for the third time that week, washing it down with purple iodine water, and somehow still finding the strength to do the job the next morning. That is a level of toughness that goes way beyond just being hungry. That is something else entirely. The story of food in the Vietnam War is not just about bad meals and green cans. It is a window into the real day-to-day experience of soldiers in a grueling, complex, and deeply human conflict. Every dented can, every traded cigarette, every improvised camp stove is a piece of that story. And those stories deserve to be told, even the ones that start with ham and lima beans. If this kind of deep dive into the real, unglamorous side of history is your thing, you know what to do. Hit that subscribe button and come back next time, because we have got plenty more where this came from. See you in the next one.